For more funny Askreddit stories, please subscribe and like the video. Those of you that waited until marriage to have sex, was it worth it or not? What did you learn from waiting? I knew a woman who married her high school sweetheart and they didn't do anything before marriage because of religious reasons. Turns out, they didn't do anything after they were married either because her husband ended up feeling very ashamed about anything sexual at all, to the point that he couldn't perform. She also couldn't get any sexual gratification because she'd had a very taboo concept of masturbation. They were married for a little over a year before they divorced. It was really sad when she told me about it. Luckily she's been through years of therapy now, and while she's still a virgin and kind of upset that she is, she doesn't like being in her mid-30s and still a virgin. She's mostly processed the entire thing and is a lot happier now than she used to be. I don't know. I have nothing else to compare it to since I've only ever been with my husband. I would say it's nice that we are each other's first. But with that comes a lot of trial and error. It might have been nice to have a partner with more experience than me. So I guess I learned that two virgins are probably not going to be great at sex for a while. And maybe I should have not had too much high expectations for a while. My brother and his ex-wife did it for religious reasons. Turned out she was maybe lesbian and either didn't admit it or realize it till she cheated on him with another girl. It was totally worth it. We grew up being really close as friends, and we thought that would actually help us. The relationship was non-sexual at the start. We didn't get together until after college. We waited a couple years, and after a while I didn't know if it would ever happen. The engagement got rough a couple times, because we would get close, but then stop last second. Do you know what it's like to have what essentially amounted to blue balls for a good 4 years? After the marriage it was all fine though until her husband found out. My best friend and her husband were virgins when they got married. Their very first kiss was at the altar. It turned out that she has an extremely high sex drive and he has an issue with touching. Of course, this led to infidelity and they ended up having to go to marriage counseling and sex counseling so that he could get over his fear of intimacy. I don't approve of her cheating at all, but I feel like it could have been avoided if they would have communicated and touched more before marriage. I don't necessarily know if she would have done things differently. Being deeply involved in seminary and church, I know they still wouldn't have had sex, but I'm fairly confident that she would have been more pressing about the intimacy issue. My wife and I waited until marriage. I was 23, she was 22. We waited because we believe what the Bible teaches about sex and marriage to be true and helpful for human flourishing. I'm glad I waited. I'm glad she is my first and only, and that I'm the same for her. Having a compatible sexual partner is a great thing, but if we'd have been incompatible, for whatever reason, I like to think we'd still be married because we didn't put sex on a higher pedestal than it deserved at the earliest stage of our relationship. By waiting until we were married to have sex we were able to demonstrate that sex wasn't the main or only reason we were together. Waiting is an act of selflessness. It's a demonstration that we highly value the person we want to spend the rest of our lives with. I'll prepare myself for the downvotes now. I'm grateful for waiting until marriage. My wife and I have been married for half a year or so, and it's been a lot of trial and error. However, our bond and our connection has really benefited from learning together. Honestly, I grew up with this big idea of what sex was, but helping my wife out of her wedding dress to see her for the first time is a moment that I will never forget, and I'm grateful for. I think religion has really done a number on sex and its cleanliness. I'm a Christian and that's why I waited. However, we tend to focus on sex is dirty and shameful, and ignore the fact that God created this act to be a beautiful bonding moment for his creation. Unfortunately, the way sex has been taught in churches has made it incredibly difficult for men and women to be comfortable with the idea of sex. TLDR, glad I waited. Teaching sex is dirty and nothing else fucks people up. My wife and I waited. It was worth the wait, but I don't begrudge anyone for not waiting. We waited for religious reasons, though we are not fundamentalists or militantly Christian by any stretch, so to each their own. We had a hard time waiting, but that did make our wedding night/honeymoon a lot more exciting. It was a lot of fun figuring each other out and learning that new skill together. It felt more like a level up than anything else, though, and had we not waited I don't think our relationship would be any better or worse. We also had essentially zero expectations for what our first time would be like, and didn't place any undue pressure on ourselves to perform. Because of that, our first time was great. Had we gone in with major expectations, though, I think it would have felt worse. Overall, worth the wait for us, but maybe not for others. I can totally understand why someone would want to make sure they're sexually compatible with another before committing. I waited. It was worth it in my specific case. Religion had part in it, but it wasn't anything like a man deserves a pure woman. Honestly, both our parents taught us to wait for love and commitment before being sexually active. When I found my now husband, we talked about what we wanted in life and family and careers and even what we expected or desired sexually. When we both knew the love and commitment, we definitely rushed to get married because we wanted to sleep together and have been happily married for 5 years now. Some religious people are crazy and take it to a totally brainwashed level, but for most Christian-based religions, the religion itself isn't written that insane. The crazy of the bunch just make it out to look that way. I do love that my husband and I have only had sex with each other, but it's not like neither one of us never got curious and googled to see other naked people or stuff like that. It's also been fun learning together and both being open-minded to trying new things or indulging in the other's fantasies. IDK, I guess. Just find someone that loves the person you are first and definitely make sure you're on the same page when it comes to sex. There's nothing wrong with waiting, as long as you're not using sex to trap someone else into committing to you. Didn't necessarily wait for marriage, but my husband is the only person I've been with. It took a long time for us to get comfortable voicing what we wanted, and there was a lot of awkwardness for a while. I think it makes us closer though, knowing that we've only ever been with each other, but if he ever cheated I think it would be a lot more devastating for us than other couples. My husband and I were both virgins when we got married because we're Christians. The Bible is many things, including a guideline on how humans should live their lives to protect themselves and others from earthly harm. God doesn't make stupid rules, just ones that we don't understand and don't like. But since Reddit is super secular, I'll just focus on the secular non-religious reasons why waiting for marriage was good for us. It made dating easier in a way through high school and college, since I was upfront and could weed out men who only wanted one thing. I never had to stress about getting into a position that I didn't want to be in. You can't get any STD stress and no pregnancy scares. My husband and I made out and discussed our sexual expectations and libidos when we were dating because we are adults. A lot of these don't do it horror stories are lacking so much communication between adults in a relationship. Our communication with everything was / is on point. I love my husband for exactly who he is on the inside, and I know he loves me for exactly who I am. We locked each other down knowing it's a relationship based on communication and respect. It built a nice base and the sex is an incredibly fun addition that keeps us close. Yes, it was a learning curve, but I only know what works on my husband and vice versa. Sex is a lot of I like that, and I don't like that. We both want nothing more than to please the other. We laugh about how inexperienced we were, but it's our special story together. Sex releases oxytocin and makes you irrationally attached. I don't want that with anyone other than the man I trust more than anything in the world. 10/10 would do it again. If it's only one of you, don't do it. I'm a guy and have only had sex with my wife because my parents were super helicopter-like. I still resent it a little, but I love my wife dearly and don't want to be with anyone else. But hear me out. My wife has had sex with previous BF of hers, and I have only had sex with her. This unfortunately made me very insecure and immature for a little while. I have gotten over it, but it was very hard for me to get over. I know this is a personal issue of mine, and I would never ever blame my wife for it, but I would totally suggest to have sex with someone else before you marry, as I went through being super insecure about anything sexual with my wife for a little while because of this. I also resent my family for not letting me have a GF till I was 18, as that made me insecure within myself also. Please, for the love of God, don't do that to your kids, and if your parents are like that, tell them to go fuck themselves. I've had to go through some pretty extensive personal therapy and mind control because of this. How should I know if it was worth it? I mean, it made things easier for our relationship. When I disclosed it, she was extremely comfortable around me and felt safer. Her own words. She also said she felt overly confident after our first time because I couldn't compare her to anyone else. What did I learn from waiting? Not a damn thing. Look, if you're waiting because you think it's going to be some cosmic altering event, it's not. You're screwing like a couple of barnyard animals. Get over yourself. If you're waiting for religious reasons, fine, to each their own. But be forewarned, size matters. Anyone who says otherwise is lying, and if you don't believe that, you better start. My wife made it clear, if I was too big it was over. It wasn't a pettiness thing, it was a I want to enjoy sex thing. I come from a Christian background and have only ever been with my wife. We waited until we were married. I don't feel like I have missed out on anything by not having sex with other people or with her before we got married. The curiosity of being with someone else is present, but rather unimportant to me. For me, it was worth waiting for a couple of reasons. First, I know a lot of Christians who compromise their belief because the temptation to do so can be overwhelming. It was a matter of self-discipline and faith for me to maintain that, even when I didn't want to. Second, that self-discipline helped me to treasure my marriage more. By not placing so much unneeded emphasis on the physical aspect, I was and am able to grow intimately with my wife beyond sex. Third, sex was so awkward during our first encounter that I couldn't imagine doing that with someone random or someone I wasn't, for lack of a better term, in love with, maybe committed to. Fourth, the Bible speaks about how sex creates a bond between two people that is unlike any other bond. The reason for it being shared specifically in marriage alone is because of that intimate bond. It isn't meant to be shared with just anyone. Although I cannot speak about what I have not experienced, I do not regret for a second that she is the only person with whom I have shared that bond. On a different note, I don't expect anyone else to think or feel the way that I do. A really close friend of mine has shared on many occasions his love for sharing that bond with as many people as possible because of how intimate it is. I don't have any judgment for those that chose not to wait. I didn't wait until marriage, but I waited until I found myself with someone I could see marrying. And sure enough, we did end up married, so my husband is the only man I've ever been with. I would definitely say that waiting until I found someone I loved and cherished in a more mature way than I could have at a younger age was worth the wait, rather than kind of throwing it away for lack of better term. Thankfully we have an absolutely stellar sex life and I feel like we are perfectly matched. However, I believe THWT sexual compatibility is really important, and I wouldn't wait until after marriage to find out that we weren't going to be compatible. Was it worth it? This literally one of those ignorance is bliss situations. I got married at 22. We've been married for 13 years now. Sure, it was worth it, but I have no knowledge of the opposite, so does my answer have any meaning? Does having sex after marriage make the sex or the marriage more valid? No, so it doesn't really matter. What did I learn from waiting? I learned what I had always suspected. I really like sex. I like it a lot. 13 years. My husband and I were both virgins on our wedding night. I don't regret waiting, but I do wish there was more conversations had about sex. The first year or so in the relationship I was faking it, because I thought that's just what women were supposed to do and didn't know how to express otherwise to my husband. I also didn't want to make him feel any less about himself than he does. I did end up telling him, and we went from already limited sex to near non-existent for a few months. We ended up having several much needed conversations about what we both need, or that we don't really know how to get there. Since then we still don't have sex as often as I'd like to, but it is much better now. I think it's important to talk about good communication. It's something I struggle with, and he struggles with and never talks about. Even with friends it's a little taboo. And I get it. Sex is a private, intimate thing, but at the same time, it needs to be normalized in public, so that when I'm in private with my husband, I don't feel so ashamed, and he doesn't have to feel like he's doing something wrong. I wasn't really presented with the opportunity to have sex before I met my wife. I guess if I pursued it more heavily with other girls it might have happened, but I was also crippled by self-doubt for whatever reason. That all melted away when I started dating my now wife. I had a courage that surprised me. We had sex before marriage. Although we are both religious, we are each other's first and only. We both fooled around with others before dating, but not intercourse. I have no regrets at all. I love being with my wife, and as far as I know she is happy as well. We celebrate 15 years of marriage next year. I think some of it is luck. I know I'm very lucky that we are on the same page about so much in life, sex included. Yes and no. There's a security in knowing he has nothing to compare me to. That said, the reason I waited was religious, and after spending 21 years hearing only negative things about sex, it's wrong, it's sinful, etc., the true love waits movement was particularly damaging in my case. I still struggle with guilt and a messed up perception of sexuality 10 years later. EMDR therapy has proven to be a total godsend lately. In just 4 months I'm able to be a lot more open sexually. I'm so excited for what the future holds. My husband is great. We learned everything about sex together, which, as others have said, hasn't always been enjoyable, but certainly a comedy of errors. We did have realistic expectations of what the wedding night and the first few weeks after would look like, so at least that wasn't a huge letdown. Once we found our rhythm things got real good.